boa tarde a todos. Vamos dar início então à segunda e última sessão do nosso seminário. Interessante como se há pouco as falas de há pouco elas nos remetiam muito mais a uma ideia de património, arquivo, que vem de um sentido mais privado ou artístico. Agora nós vamos entrar num debate que tem tudo a ver com as questões públicas, de participação pública, de políticas públicas das instituições. Temos connosco hoje aqui a Sarah Schultz e a Katie Bruce, e eu quero agradecer, antes de tudo, ao Walker Art Center, ao Goma e ao British Council por terem proporcionado a vinda das duas palestrantes de hoje. Eu vou começar por introduzir um pouco esta mesa. Elas vão falar aproximadamente 20 a 25 minutos e, de seguida, iremos ter um debate que penso que possa ser bem interessante, como também aquele debate que tivemos há pouco. O título desta mesa chama-se Reconfigurações do público nas instituições, novas colaborações entre práticas artísticas, pedagógicas e curatoriais. É um pouco a partir desta palavra reconfigurações do público que iniciamos aqui o debate, este sentido em que reconfigurar é expandir o modo como pensamos os museus, pensamos os públicos, quem são os nossos públicos, e isto relembra um pouco aquilo que estávamos a falar ontem no grupo de estudos. Nós desconhecemos muitas vezes quem são os públicos dos museus e, nesse sentido, muitas vezes adotamos práticas que muitas vezes não vão ao encontro dessas expectativas. Ambas, a Katie e a Sarah, elas trazem-nos exemplos de uma reflexão sobre o que significa prática pública para as instituições culturais. Esta reflexão ela está estreitamente associada aos contextos das cidades de onde elas vêm, e aos seus, ambos, nestas cidades, estes tecidos extremamente complexos, tecidos económicos, sociais, culturais, simbólicos. Estamos a falar de instituições de grande carga tradicional, estamos a falar de públicos das mais variadas tessituras, e nesse sentido, essas práticas públicas elas têm vindo a espelhar essa complexidade. As duas falas elas vão ser, apesar de bastante similares nessa prática pública, elas vão espelhar algumas diferenças, não como ponto de chegada, mas talvez como ponto de partida. Por um lado, a Sarah, ela talvez nos vá colocar a questão, pelo menos daquilo que eu tive conhecimento do paper dela, como é que a instituição cultural ela pode ser um town meeting, um fórum, uma praça onde essa praça possa reverberar toda essa complexidade. No caso da Katie, talvez que a questão possa ser como os espaços podem criar uma visibilidade para todos os públicos. Eu queria só aproveitar aqui para ler um brevíssimo excerto de um autor que não pensou os museus, mas pensou as bibliotecas. Esse autor, Umberto Eco, ele fala-nos das bibliotecas, isto na década de 80, por aí, e ele tem um pequeno excerto muito interessante em que nos faz pensar de um modo muito diferente sobre o papel das bibliotecas públicas, e nesse sentido ele desloca aquela ideia antiga que nós tínhamos sobre as bibliotecas como lugares bafientos, de sacristia, em que para pedir um livro era necessário que a senhora saísse da secretária onde estava e fosse lá atrás, e nós demorávamos 2 horas, 3 horas, uma eternidade. Então ele, para evocar essa ideia de uma biblioteca como uma praça, uma biblioteca como um espaço onde irá fazer descobertas, ele diz assim: leio os jornais, deixo até ao bar com alguns livros, depois vou à procura de outros, faço descobertas. Engano-me no andar, entro numa zona em que não suspeitava que pudesse vir a entrar, uma zona de medicina, mas de repente encontro algumas obras de Galeno, portanto, com algumas referências filosóficas. Deve também, ainda, esta biblioteca, ser à medida do homem, alegre, com a possibilidade de tomar um café, com a possibilidade de 2 estudantes, numa tarde, se sentarem no Maple e consumarem parte do seu namoro na biblioteca, enquanto retiram e voltam a pôr nas estantes alguns livros de interesse científico. Portanto, uma biblioteca onde apeteça ir e passar o tempo livre. Esta reconfiguração deste espaço público que é a biblioteca serve-nos para introduzir agora esta reconfiguração do espaço do museu que pode servir de mote para o nosso debate. Vou começar pela Sarah Schultz. A Sarah é diretora de educação e curadora de práticas públicas no Walker Art Center. Foi diretora associada do público, programas para adolescentes. Essa é uma parte do programa de educação e comunidade do Walker. Esteve envolvida nesse compromisso do Walker Center em participar, em trazer cada vez mais públicos para a instituição, e nesse sentido foi uma pessoa importante na criação de programas inovadores para o envolvimento dos visitantes. Dos principais ensaios escritos pela Sarah, eu iria destacar 2, Expanding the Center, Walker Art Center, e um outro que ela coeditou, que se chama Open Field, e é sobre esse que ela vai falar hoje, Open Field Conversations on the Commons. Ela explora aqui, neste ensaio, o significado da prática pública para as instituições. Este recente título que lhe foi atribuído sobre Curadora de Práticas Públicas reflete também a evolução do Departamento de Educação do Walker. Portanto, é um reflexo do papel que a educação tem no Walker Art Center. Eu vou passar então a palavra à Sarah Schultz, que vai falar sobre a sua comunicação intitulada Expanding the Center, Expanding Our Practice. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Jessica and Guillermo for inviting me to participate in what has been already a very, very invigorating and exciting 2 days of conversations, and I look forward to more. The majority of what I want to talk about, and I'm going to actually go through the beginning part of my presentation very quickly and put myself on a timer. Let's see if I can do this. There you go. But the majority of what I want to talk about is a 3-year project called Open Field. And I want to use this as a kind of case study for thinking about museum practice as a public practice. And what kind of public practice do I want to shape for myself and my museum and my community? But I thought it would also be helpful to very quickly give some context to all of you by talking a little bit about the museum that I come from, its history, and my own 20-year history with it. So the Walker Art Center is a contemporary art center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is right in the middle of the United States. It's not near any ocean. It's not near any major contemporary art market. It's in what is known as the Upper Midwest. And right now it's very, very cold there. Across the street from the museum is a 11.5-acre sculpture garden that was built in 1988. It is also a multidisciplinary center and has been for a very long time, which makes it, or at least made it, unique among contemporary art centers. So it has programs in design and architecture. It has a very active performing arts program. It has a film video program. And it has a visual arts program in addition to an education and community programs division. The museum was actually really started as the Walker Art Gallery. It was the collection of an American industrialist named T.B. Walker, who had, one could say, a very mixed collection of artwork that he built and housed in a private gallery. And in 1929, during the Great Depression, the family lost the bulk of its wealth and were struggling to figure out how to keep the gallery open. At the same time, in the 1930s, the federal government started something called the WPA, or the Works Progress administration. And there was a goal of trying to put Americans back to work. It was basically a stimulus package. And at that time, the government worked with communities actually to develop community arts centers as a way not only to put people back to work, but as a way to revitalize communities. And at that time, a group of citizens from the Walker Arts Center, the Walker family, and the WPA and the federal government came together and actually formed what is now known as the Walker Arts Center. And I like to show this image, and I'll read it aloud. It says, "The citizens of Minneapolis are offered a community center for art and other activities. Shall we take it?" And I like to think about this. I keep this image actually in my office because it reminds me that our communities are actually free to not choose us if they don't want to. And you can see by the shape of the architecture the transformation from the Moorish facade of T.B. Walker's private collection to the modernist facade of the Walker Arts Center, announcing its reinvention. The other activities actually were a very dominant feature of the Walker. It had an art school. It offered workshops in all forms of art making. And these workshops actually really for the amateur or the hobbyist. And here in this newspaper article, it says, "Art, just for fun. 2000 attend Walker Center's free classes." Along with it, the Walker was actually one of the first museums in the country to have an active design program, and it kept a space called the Everyday Art Gallery. And this was a place where good design and everyday objects were displayed and exhibited for the edification and the delight of the community. And lastly, along with this, I like to show this image as well, because there was a lot of invention and play at the Walker Arts Center in its early days. This is a program called The Inquisition. This was a game show. It was based on a radio show, and it pitted curators against lay people in their knowledge of art. And as you could see, it's a dead heat with the audience and the experts neck and neck. So this just gives you some sort of sense of what I like to think of as the organizational DNA, or the bones, the kind of organizational bones and tenor of the Walker Arts Center has been. And just as a quote, this is from Daniel Deffenbacher, who was the first director of the Walker Arts Center. He says, "An art center is a town meeting in a field of human endeavor, as old as man himself. By definition, it is a meeting place for all the arts. It provides space in which the public can both participate and be a spectator." This was over 70 years ago. Now we're going to jump forward to 1992 when I came to the Walker Arts Center. And when I came to the Walker, we had a new director, Kathy Hallbreich, and it was a time in the US when museums were really looking at how to embrace the communities in which they live and how to provide access to those people that had typically been disenfranchised or not included in the space of the museum. And you can see from the facade how the architecture speaks of the institution's desire. This is a piece by Lawrence Weiner that Kathy Hallbreich installed that says, "Bits and pieces put together to present the semblance of a whole." I'm just going to check my time. Great, thanks. And so at this time, these were the people who were coming to the Walker. We had gallery goers, performing arts audiences, school groups, families, tourists. But who wasn't coming to the Walker? Well, who wasn't coming to the Walker were teenagers, diverse ethnic communities, and low-income audiences. And so some of the first work I was involved in at the Walker was actually starting a teen program 15 years ago. And we launched a teen arts council that still exists today. We're a group of 12 youth who actually meet weekly and organize programs for the museum, at the museum for their peers. And they organize events. This is something called Task Party. They do projects with artists. Here they're working with a filmmaker making experimental films on skateboards. They host events in the community. This is a breakdance contest that was held at a local park. I was also very actively involved in the early stages of the Walker's Artist in Residence program. And at the time, artists who were chosen by the curators and commissioned to do projects were also asked to develop projects or engagements with the local community. And this was a way, actually, of trying to work with very diverse communities. So Ralph Lemon, for example, the choreographer, dancer Ralph Lemon, actually worked with a group of youth, African-American youth in North Minneapolis. This was a group of Native American youth who worked with an artist, Sam Durant. We worked with the Hmong community. We also worked with a very recent Somali and East African immigrant community. And working with artists was a way for us to engage these disenfranchised populations. At the same time, we were also really looking at how to animate the galleries and be much more intentional about the gallery as a kind of dialogic space. Oh, not sure what happened there. Uh-oh. We don't want to, oh, there we go, okay. And then we did things online as well. So this was, we had a project for teachers, where teachers could work with material from the institution and create curriculum, and this was a site for Minnesota artists. By the time we were entering into the new phase of building the building that I showed you, we had really this idea of the town square in mind, that the metaphor for the museum is no longer a church or a temple, a sacred place, but rather a forum or town square where people can converge and meet. And so a lot of our effort was made on not just including people who had not been included in the institution, but actually converging those people together and creating opportunities for people to actually come across their various differences to participate in activities together. This is a yoga class for parents taught by an artist. We have a program for people who have early on-stage Alzheimer's. This was another teen program where they did a project actually in the gallery. This is a karaoke night. And these are art activities that take place outside in the sculpture garden. So really this starts to ask the question is, what does it mean to actually have a public practice? And this is where I want to introduce the project Open Field. So all of this work that I've been doing for the last 15 years has really, I think, converged and come together in Open Field. Open Field is a 3-year experiment that really invites the public and artists together to create a cultural commons on the Walker's green space. And the word commons was very important to us, this idea that they're resources that we share and that we're collectively responsible for together. It's really inspired by the belief that creative communities are very collective endeavors and that you need a landscape of very diverse ideas and practices for new things to happen. We really began with a very simple question. There's a lawn next to the Walker that really was empty and fallow like this. And we asked ourselves, what should we do with this open field? And we realized that the only way to answer that question was to actually invite the public to help us answer that. And again, this is just this idea that this was really rooted in a lot of the work that we had done before. This just didn't happen overnight. I won't go into this right now. So in theory, we were looking at new forms of artistic practice. New forms of artistic practice, that's not really going to work. Participatory culture, so really looking at what was happening on the internet with technology and do-it-yourself culture, and the ways in which people were making their own culture and sharing it online, as well as looking at these ideas about the commons and the political ramifications of what a commons is. In practice, it really brings together the public, the artists, and the institution. And the institution is supposed to show up in the purple there, but apparently it didn't. So perhaps the institution is secretly absent. Its goals really and we had very specific goals. We wanted to resist the notion that the museum is the primary author of content and experience. We wanted to create a platform for many different types of creative activity, generated by both artists and non-artists. We wanted to position creativity as a collective and a civic endeavor, that in order to have a healthy democracy, you had to have people who actually felt like they had creative agency. We wanted to imagine a new kind of public gathering space for the city, and we wanted to blend this idea of the social experience, the intellectual experience, and a creative experience. So we convened a group of architects, artists, and designers to collaborate with us on designing the field. They looked at all of the problems. This was the site in the beginning, and you can see there are things like the wall is a barrier. You need to create a gathering place. You need to connect the upper and the lower part. And most of all, you need to have beer. They also plotted all kinds of interactions that could happen between artists and the public. And so this is what our programming model looks like. In the middle it says they're resident stealth teachers, problem posers, provocateurs, and those are the 12 artists in the middle. And they move between the public and the masses and the audience who are giving them ideas, and they're giving other people ideas, and new ideas are forming, and it just becomes this whirling circle of activity. It's not quite how it looked, but they also suggested tools and amenities to make the field more inviting. So you need shade, you need a place to lie down, you need a break from the wind, just these sort of basic ways of dealing with the elements. And so then we actually created this space. And we had food, shade, seating, and a very large open field. Some of the things we did is we created a tool shed. This was a space where there were games, there were art activities, there were a variety of things for people to do for themselves. They could just come and take what they needed and go out into the field. We also created platforms, programs that happened regularly. So what you see up here is called Drawing Club, where people could come every Thursday night and collaboratively draw together. And everything was collaborative. The saying was, what is made in Drawing Club stays in Drawing Club. The public was also invited to share their own creative activities with minimal mediation and very modest support. And when I say minimal mediation, there was no mediation. People could actually do whatever it was they wanted. The saying open field, the saying of open field, the motto of open field is what we make together. And we actually created a website where people could post their activities and share them with other people. We also had guidelines and rules because while it was very open, we also wanted people to be safe, and we also wanted to make sure that no one took advantage of the space and inhibited other people from doing things. At first we called them rules, and we realized that was very off-putting, so then write a poem, write some prose, do whatever, you crazy kids. In hindsight, our strategies actually looked like something very tangible. There were tools for empowering participation, rules for guiding participation, seeding or modeling. So in a way, we actually invited people that we knew would do interesting things to come do them so other people could learn from them. So kind of social learning took place. And then meeting to nurture very casual encounters so people could just come and enjoy themselves with one another. Over the course of 2 years, the public brought over the course of 3 years, the public brought more than 300 activities to the field. This is an iron pour. We had a group of students who would practice their violin at night. We had people lead conversations. This is one on the history of the public intellectual. We had hundreds of people come and do yoga together. We wrote love letters to people and then sent them to random strangers from the phone book. We had an opera. We had people doing plein air painting or very, very representational painting. We also invited artists to work alongside with the public. So every summer we'd invite 2 collectives to come do projects. This is the collective Red 76. They built a schoolhouse called Anywhere, Anyplace Academy with the public. They had a pop-up book academy. This is a collective from San Francisco called Future Farmers. They did a project called A People Without a Voice Cannot Be Heard, which looked at the voice and how it constructs community. We worked with a group from LA called Machine Project. They did 17 projects in 2 weeks. I wouldn't recommend doing this, including a concert that we did on the lawn with push mowers. They did an opera for dogs. We built an outdoor oven. We did a project called Kitchen Lab where we built mobile kitchens and then took them out into the community to do projects. This is somebody took a solar oven and did a community soup project at a farmer's market. And then a group of designers actually remade works from the Walker's collection with the public. And here someone's making a Carl Andre, he's making a Carl Andre aisle piece out of, with chainsaws, from trunks of trees that had been cut down from neighborhoods in Minneapolis. And really what this taught us is that a platform like Open Field, creating a space where anything can happen, when you do that, anything does happen. And so what happened the very last month of the project is I had a young intern come to me in the beginning of the summer and ask me if she could do a social experiment. And she wanted to see if people who watched, how many, do people watch cat videos? Do you watch cat videos? Some do, right? The two British men down front watch the cat videos. Well, cat videos are very popular on the internet and people share them. And she wanted to see if people who watch cat videos online would actually come together in real life to watch them. And so she asked me if she could do this, and I said sure, thinking that we would have a laptop and about 100 people sitting around a table. What happened is the project went viral on the internet. We had over 10,000 submissions to the festival, over 3 million hits or mentions. Like if you did a Google search, there were 3 million times the Walker Art Center cat. And on an August evening this summer, 10,000 people showed up at the Walker to watch internet cat videos together. And we made the cover of the Saturday edition of the New York Times. We had almost every major media outlet in the United States at that event. So what have we learned? To quote one of the artists, we will learn from these things in ways no one could have taught us. In other words, you can only learn by doing these things. We have learned the value of utopic imagination. We have learned to stop asking why and start asking why not. We have learned that our presence is important on the field. This is one of my colleagues, Scott Stulin, who's actually participating in one of the LARPing events. We were present at every single event. We have learned that context can indeed transform any content. We have learned that there are no bounds to creative practice. We have learned that good participation is not a measurement. And the word good, I realize, is a little controversial, even in our own institution, this idea that we have a good participation. But one of the reasons we're sort of holding on to the word good is that we see it as a sentiment, as an approach, as a set of values or an ethics, and not really a measurement. And so what do we mean by good participation? Or what do we mean by perhaps good public practice? Good participation sometimes looks like failure. Good participation provides a platform in which people can bring their best creative selves forward. Good participation investigates the unknown. Good participation, or our public practice, maybe I'll change it to that, transforms even the most traditional places. Good participation embodies our most cherished values and ethics, and for us, those are sincerity, authenticity, and generosity. Good participation is not temporary. This is an article about the teens, the first group of teens who started with us 15 years ago and where they are now. Good participation does not back away from complexity. Good participation builds relationships, and we could spend probably several days talking about what that means and what kind of relationships we're building. Good participation is about pleasure. Good participation allows for play. Good participation dismantles hierarchy. And here these two are sitting at one of the schools. It's called the Human and Dragon School for Peace and Reconciliation through Story and Song. In the end, I believe that participation or our own public practice actually asks everything of us that art asks of us. And in that way, it frees both us and the art. And again, I think that for us, our public practice is actually the things that we make together with our public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your inspiring presentation and your Walker's concept of museum behind the exhibition. Agora vou falar em português para apresentar a Katie. Quando eu estava a fazer a leitura do material sobre a Katie, achei bastante interessante que muitas das suas ações tinham juntas duas palavras, arte contemporânea e direitos humanos. Então, esta apresentação vai também ser sobre algumas dessas atividades de práticas públicas que envolvem uma variada network, uma variada rede de agentes, de instituições da cidade. Portanto, o trabalho da Katie é uma costura, uma articulação de várias instituições que trabalham na cidade, são os agentes da cidade. A Kate Bruce é produtora e curadora do GOMA, da Galeria de Arte Moderna de Glasgow. Ela foi coordenadora anteriormente do Programa de Inclusão Social do GOMA e tem trabalhado também nos programas das Bienais de Justiça Social. Ela passou por variados e diversos programas desta instituição e usa a arte contemporânea para linkar com variadas áreas de atuação dos direitos humanos, seja os direitos humanos no que respeita à violência das mulheres, no que respeita aos direitos homossexuais, gays, bissexuais, transgêneros, etc. Portanto, toda a complexidade na questão de identidade. E muitos dos seus programas públicos nesta instituição têm tido um reconhecimento crítico e levado a muitos prémios no que toca a este respeito. Alguns dos trabalhos da Katie têm sido com artistas contemporâneos bem destacados, Félix González Torres, Nan Golding, Catherine Opie, Grayson Perry, etc., juntando sempre a questão dos direitos ou questões da sociedade de Glasgow. Portanto, eu vou passar agora à Katie, que vai fazer também uma apresentação neste tempo.
Okay, thank you very much, Marta, and thank you very much to Jessica and Guilherme for inviting me here and for the British Council for supporting me to make it over here. I was just going to show this. I'm going to talk mostly about I'm going to talk completely about the work between 2003 and 2009, which relates to our social justice biennial programs. This is by no means all the work that happened between 2003 and 2009. There are a number of other exhibitions and major collection shows and acquisitions and other community programs, but this is a very particular strand of work that GOMA has become quite unique in its delivery of. So that's me, just there. Kind of just to give you a little bit of the context and the background, the Gallery of Modern Art is managed by Glasgow Museums, and it's the largest civic museum service in the UK. and it's displayed across 10 museums in the city. And we get around about 3 million visits per year. We are free of charge. And we're publicly funded, but we operate in a highly politicized context. This is the building itself. It's bang in the centre of Glasgow. It used to be a private house built on slavery, or proceeds from slavery. It changed into a royal exchange in the 1800s, so it became that notion of exchange coming back in that was kind of really particular to yesterday. So it's a really interesting building for the history of it, and then it became a public library, and in 1996 reopened as an art gallery within that. But to give you a little bit, we're now part of Glasgow Life, which sounds like an insurance company in Great Britain, but it is actually, it's an old department of the council, which was culture and sport. And you can kind of see the different areas within that make it up. And the Gallery of Modern Art has recently undergone a bit of a change, that it's no longer completely in Glasgow museums. Some of the staff, including me, are now in Glasgow Arts. And we're kind of in a process of articulating what that means for us as a kind of collecting public institution that has a museum ethic to the work that we do. But we're now within a department of an arts team which is exploring the temporal, the now, cross-art form, and also a different way, in some ways, of operating it ethically in terms of the way that it approaches work, although it's still part of the same company as such as I am now known. To give you a little bit of flavour, this is not the social justice programmes. This is an artist, Jim Lambie, who some of you may or may not know. This is our ground floor space. So this is the old exchange. This is the old banking area. This is our gallery 2, and this is collection work that we recently bought. In the forefront is Glasgow artist Scott Miles and Simon Starling in the background, who is a Turner Prize winner. So Glasgow is an interesting space to be in, just because it's got, I'll show you photographs a bit later, but it's got some of the highest areas of deprivation in the city. It's got some of areas of poverty. Its health figures in the west of Scotland and Glasgow, kind of the lowest death rate than in some developing third world countries. It has huge issues. It's known as the knife crime capital of Europe, so it has huge kind of public issues, and within the Glasgow and within the museums we tend to have a responsibility, or that we feel that we have a responsibility as part of our sorry, that's not I'm only at the beginning.
Sorry, no, you can keep going.
Can I? Thank you. So it's got a really kind of multiple area, multiple kind of voices within the city that kind of sometimes are in conflict with each other, because it presents itself as a very creative, it presents itself as a lively city. It kind of hit Lonely Planet's 10 most places to visit in 1 year, but actually within areas of the city, there's some really, really difficult situations that people will live in. But within this, it has a very, very vibrant arts community. So you're looking at, this is the top gallery, Gallery 4. This is the studio space, which is a kind of, used to be the cafe and is now the dedicated education space. You're looking at the library, which used to be the dedicated education space and is now a library. And this is Glasgow, taken from our hill. Glasgow prides itself on being built on hills, but it's nothing like the mountains of Rio. But you can kind of see it's got high rises, but quite a lot of low building, and it's known as the Dear Green Place. There's a lot of green spaces within this, although nothing in the centre of town, like the Walker Art Gallery, where our gallery is. But this is an area, it's going through massive regeneration, because in 2014 we have the Commonwealth Games. So again, the areas of the city are going through probably similar things that you're experiencing in Rio, going towards 2016 for the Olympic Games. And this has been the backdrop of a number of arts projects that we've been involved in and are continually involved in. So, skipping on. Sorry, I need to. Oh, it works. When it works, it works. Oh. I'll just keep talking. It is kind of fancy, and it did work. I'm not going to try and do that. In the other square over here is all the services that we kind of use. Before I start talking about it, we are quite a small team. In the centre is the museum manager, Victoria Hollows, who I think you would probably call a museum director over here. There are 2 curators who collect, they do temporary exhibitions, and they're half in the museums and half in the arts team. We have a learning and access curator and 2.5 learning assistants who deliver the venue-based learning program, so that's formal and informal. We have me, I'm now a producer curator, I was the social inclusion coordinator. And was kind of, my job was primarily connected with the human rights programs. We have one technician, so it's a really small team in terms of the actual work that we tried to produce coming out of this. And I'm sorry if I'm kind of skipping, we kind of had our time caught, so I'm kind of trying to cram as much in to as little time as I can. Sanctuary was the first program that we did in 2003, and it's that sort of thing about a highly politicized organization that we're in that Sanctuary didn't come out of the curatorial desire to do something like this. It came out of a kind of council policy. There was an equality strategy group meeting that came up with a paper in 2001 that there will be art and social inclusion exhibitions. And social inclusion, I was asked to explain this a little bit. This is a kind of result of Labour policies that it kind of, in order to address kind of the inequalities created by years of a Tory government, Labour policies wanted to look at who was excluded and how do we include them. So similar to the way that the Walker-in programme was kind of looking at how do we get those people who are not using our services into using our services. So this was one of the ways that had come out of this inclusion committee. And what these exhibitions around social justice or social inclusion exhibitions would do is to raise public awareness of social exclusion issues through harnessing, and note that word harnessing, and the power of visual art to reach a wide audience, to give people from excluded group a voice in major city centre venues and to give them opportunities for creative self-expression, to counteract negative media portrayal of social exclusion issues by showing that the current issues are not new, that Glasgow has a long history of engaging with these and similar problems. So Sanctuary kind of started with this desire of a paper. It also kind of started with quite a big budget, but also a kind of fundraising thing. And it wasn't that it was to be a subtle intervention in the gallery program. The idea is it was going to be this massive, great big program that would include international and local artists, and it would include outreach, it would include schools, it would include events. And it would also include a lead-in exhibition, which I'm really sorry, I could not find any digital images. It was done before I arrived in 2002. So one of the curators, Sean McGlashan, decided he would do a group show and research the artists. Now, to go back to Glasgow, it was a difficult period. Part of the reason that the curators were nervous about this exhibition was that the Gallery of Modern Art had opened up in Glasgow. Julian Spalding, the then director, wanted it to be popular. He chose all sorts of artists. He had a huge budget compared to what we have now to buy new work, and bought Beryl Cooks, and he did buy Salgado, and he bought some other works as well, but it was very popular, but he ignored the artists in the city who were working conceptually. So there was a huge backlash amongst the art community. So in doing these exhibitions, the curators at the time thought, oh no, we're just going to be even more vilified publicly for doing this kind of work within the local art community. But the curator managed to get on board quite a number of artists, and those local artists who had ignored us for 6 years wanted to be part of this exhibition. So it was a really interesting time for the Gallery of Modern Art, and something that the curators were quite sceptical about approaching, and what might damage their reputation actually enhanced the reputation and changed the building and how we operated in a number of different ways, including the artists that wanted to work with us. So Anthony Gormley was one of the first. We had Louise Bourgeois, we had Alfredo Chiar, Nancy Spiro was involved in that exhibition. These are more local artists, Kenny Hunter, Graham Fager, and Sad Hiri is in the background. And this is upstairs. Mario Rossi and Hans Hake were involved in this exhibition as well. Alongside this, I came in 2002 with the projects kind of pretty much set up. Somebody had set it up before me, and they'd made contact with a couple of refugee groups in the city, and a couple of artists. And they put together a 6-week project which issues were going to be explored, and at the end of it there would be an exhibition for each project, which scared me completely because I'd come from a hospital environment where I'd worked in a therapeutic way with people for sometimes 5 years. So the idea of going down to a 2-hour workshop with artists to explore issues deeply and meaningfully for the people that we were working with, I really couldn't see working. So I had to mess around with the budget, I had to go back to the funding bodies, I had to play around with it. And I was incredibly fortunate with the artists and the people that we worked together. And I think it's that arte povera is what comes out of the materials in the room. And those people from all walks and the materials there are very, very important in this process. So the other thing is that, right, Sanctuary, the main exhibition, opened up the same night as some of the projects. And the people who were the local asylum seeking refugees were there mingling with the artists. And it was a huge success. It was the biggest opening we'd had. And it completely changed the way that we approach. So what you're looking at now is some of the exhibitions that were created out of the collaborations between artists and asylum seekers and refugees in the city. So this was an English class who the teacher reported back they spoke more English during the art sessions than they ever spoke in their English classes. And they created a cookbook, which was later sold in our shop. This is another piece from one of the groups with young people who made giant paintings which were changed into stamps. And this is one of the young people from the Mac Bowles group who kind of were bringing their stories and their histories into the paintings that they were doing. And then following on from that, we put an open call out to groups to exhibit in our exhibition. And one of the community groups that we'd worked with felt confident enough to kind of apply back to us and put forward a proposal for an exhibition, which was really exciting because this was a big move for that. Moving on to the next program, and I'm scared I'm going to go massively out of time. In 2005. Now, the lead-in program for this in 2004 was incredibly informative and changing, called Elbow Room. And I was allowed, with Elbow Room, I was able to develop the project, fundraise it, pick the artists I wanted to work with, and work right the way through as an artist from within the process, as well as a coordinator and curator. So I was able to shape this one, unlike the Sanctuary projects, that I had to just work with what I was able to do. So again, I'm skipping over some of the things, but like Sanctuary, we had partners. We partnered with Amnesty International. We partnered with Amnesty International again for this exhibition, and also Rape Crisis Scotland. But I'll talk about the project in a little bit more detail. This is a Barbara Kruger installation. So going from the group show to a single artist show. The curator wanted to work rather than try and bring in lots of artists with one. And Barbara Kruger, we were quite late in approaching her, but she was extremely keen to be involved with the organization and this whole program, mainly because she felt that the way that we were approaching it with the communities, partnerships with Amnesty International, looking at exploring issue-based work, just wouldn't happen in the United States. And it really intrigued her to see how this model was working. And she created this really incredible, powerful installation in the top floor of our building for this. And she also created a marketing campaign, which local community groups appropriated and started to use for their gender-based violence campaigns as well. What we learned from Sanctuary is we had no response space. Our shop sales plummeted during Sanctuary. The shop became the counselling office where people were coming out of the exhibition and not sure where to go. So it was very, very carefully thought through by the time it got to this next program. And the response space, you can see in the background, there's an international campaign started in Canada called the White Ribbon Campaign, and it's asking men not to condone, not to commit, and not to permit violence against women. So we used the ribbons as a way of collecting our comments back, and was really kind of taken up. Alongside statistics around violence against women, there were catalogues on Barbara Kruger's work, but there were also leaflets for women where to go if they were experiencing violence against women in that space that they could pick up. There was also an amnesty campaign, which you can't actually see in this video, in this slide. This is part of the engaged workshops that I worked. Jo Hodges worked with women in Glasgow Greater Easterhouse Women's Aid, so women in refuge, and they were looking at handbags and how control of what was in your bag and how people controlled your lives. This is Janie Nicol and Alex Hetherington worked with young women who were kind of talking about how fashion and how to arm yourself as a young woman in the 21st century, sorry. This is Anne Elliott, who worked with women who had either been in prison or were at risk of going to prison, and they came up with a game that you played on chance, and they created all the kind of models and scenarios that you could be involved in this game that was then played and recorded. This was done with women with drug issues, and lots of drug issues are connected in with prostitution and violence against and gender-based violence in Glasgow. And again, the handbag re-emerges. This is the interior of a handbag. And again, that interesting way about how artists were able to work within Barbara Kruger. The day that Barbara Kruger's exhibition closed, Alex Hetherington and Janie Nicol held a fashion show for the young people that they were working in. And again, they were looking at the same group that did the exhibition before. How do you arm yourself? How do young people project themselves within this kind of whole context that they were living in the city? Talking about Elbow Room more specifically, I'm now wishing I didn't have all the paths in Jessica. It's going to take me ages. The flats that you saw at the beginning was the first place that this is a project that we worked with women involved in prostitution. So we couldn't name them. It was a very sporadic contact. I was one of the artists on that, and we almost had to leave messages for the women so that they could respond back. And a lot of the work, lots of discussions came around self-defense and how they were feeling. This is a staff member, and how they were portrayed. And there was a real sense of their image and that they were that their voice wasn't visible of their real. So it was actually being able to put their voices into the institution itself. We made a work based on their conversations, which related to the idea that the only information they had in there were leaflets. So we made leaflets, but it wasn't the state's voice telling them how to behave and how to modify their behavior. It was them giving their stories back to all those people, and these were made available in the exhibition for people to take away. And this is an example from the video. We worked with young children in refuge who created a safe space in a public space. And then that was transferred back into the exhibition in the gallery. And the superhero outfit is Childman. Childman comes and saves young children whose mothers are being beaten up. And this was from a young boy. And the Women's Library kind of explored safe spaces within, with wordplay, and a very, very different project. So Violet, Violent, Violets. And they looked at spine poetry. And this is in the north of Glasgow, where women basically played. And it was about that kind of sense of freedom, how they reclaimed their play space, how they reclaimed the space where they could walk, rather than, again, that gender-based, the victim, women need to modify their behaviors, but men can go ahead and kind of do that. So it was about supporting the women to go out into a big public space and play. And there were different play activities each week. And it ended up in this was an amazing collective that came together. The women went beyond expectation and fundraised to do this public event where they invited other women to come and walk the labyrinth with them. While one of the women who'd been incredibly quiet, you can't see her here, she's just about to come out, spoke a poem that was written by one of the other women, which then became this film that was in the space. And interestingly, that's another excerpt from it. And interestingly enough, we talk about sustainability. This group, we kind of were like, oh, this is amazing, we've come together. What do you want to do next? And they went, actually, thank you. This has been an amazing experience, but we feel it's at the end point now. So there's that interesting thing, going back to what you're saying about those that want to keep the engagement and those that kind of feel that what they've done is enough, and it's been a reprieve of the moment, and that's what it is. It's that special space for that. We're only in 2007. I'm hoping my time's okay. The next issue we looked at was sectarianism. And sectarianism In Glasgow is a very particular thing. It's between Protestants and Catholics, although sectarianism in a wider context can be seen as hatred and abuse and a discrimination between kind of identities and neighbourhoods and things. We chose a local artist this time, so again a solo show called Roderick Buchanan. He was kind of he'd been exhibiting internationally as well as locally, and this was his first major show in the Gallery of Modern Art. And he didn't want to do a didactic exhibition, he wanted to hold a mirror up to sectarianism in Glasgow. And interestingly enough, the subtle things you do to change the dynamics of an audience. We had more men visiting this exhibition than women. Normally it's about 60-40 women. This time it flipped. And the reason we reckon was there were pictures of footballers. So it's interesting how that kind of shifts the audience, and then it shifted the responses that we got as well. He also worked with a flute band, one from a Catholic side and one from a Protestant side. And the whole process of this, you can't see from the final installation. There's actually a wall down the middle because the bands refused to be seen on the same screen. So the actual architecture of the exhibition changed within the process where the artist was working with the organisations that he'd kind of chosen or had approached to do. And it was a really, really interesting process. And there were points where this work might not have happened for various things. Again, the response space, so you have leaflets about the history of Scotland, sectarianism, how churches work, and also the artist talking about his work. For the outreach projects, we wanted to do something slightly different. The idea that sectarianism was connected with football, it was also connected with areas in Glasgow with poverty, and it was connected with young men and violence. So we worked with the local councillors instead, because we wanted to shift it from that. And it's really interesting working with councillors because they snap their fingers and things happen. But for the artist, it proposed a number of challenges because they were busy, and what they didn't necessarily have a full understanding of what being involved in this project meant. And I think it was quite challenging for the councillors who often turn up at these types of projects and say, what a wonderful thing this is great for our city, but don't really understand the processes involved. And I think both of them had a real kind of shift in mindset going through the actual process with the artists. And this is their final work, which opened at the same night as Roderick Buchanan's work in the gallery. We worked with young people who were again, just gravitated towards the football grounds and worked primarily in photography with them, documenting their area. So going back to that way about the cultural things that happen in your area and how young people document and mark that, and playing around with the football work and in the local areas. And we also work with taxi drivers, because taxi drivers go through all the different spaces in the city. And we started this idea of researching, so we worked with them to give their stories, which we then presented in a film, which was then supported by 2 academics who were going to use the research within the film, the ensuing discussion as a basis for research in sectarianism. But it didn't quite work because the Scottish National Party came in and said sectarianism was no longer an issue in Scotland and buried it. Until about 1 year ago, when there were a couple of parcel bombs sent to Celtic football players and managers and lawyers, in which case they suddenly refunded the local organisations which we'd been working with on this project, Sense Against Sectarianism and Nil by Mouth and Bridging the Gap, to make it look like they were doing something again. So again, the political way that issues are tackled in our country, it's visibility. And we also had an artist in residence, and this fantastic artist, Anthony Schrag, worked with a writer in residence, Maggie, and they just bonded, and they just worked so well together. And they worked with young people in Tory Glen, which is quite a neglected area, although not anymore because of not the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games that we've got coming in. So they're being regenerated. So it was about the issues for the young people, and again, it came down to play and dens and spaces that they were allowed to be in. And that idea of graffiti, in that their thought was, well, the council gets to mark everything across this building. We put one sign of graffiti and the council comes and removes it. Who owns the space? And this is a reconstruction of their den area. And they were questioned, again, the young people started to question what the council was really doing for them. That idea of just making decisions without ever having been to the area. And actually, Anthony organised a meeting in a marquee in the middle of Torrygren, where he invited the head of Glasgow Museums, he invited the board, met the council, the head of the council, and various other people connected, and said, look, you never come to this, you talk about this area, but you never actually come and sit and talk about the issues in this area with the people of this area. And we were sat under this marquee while people were kind of wandering by and kind of crossing in and overhearing our conversations, and that idea of moving it out into the public. 2009, you will be relieved to hear I'm nearly there. After those issues, we kind of wanted to look at another issue that was pertinent in Glasgow, and there'd been a review of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender cultures and human rights issues in Scotland. And there was a real feeling that maybe we could work with this and do something in that. And also collection, we were starting to buy international work. We just got Art Fund International money. So we worked with an advisory group made up of local policy makers, local lobby groups within the LGBTI community, and a local LGBTI arts company. And the idea was that in the Gallery of Modern Art, we know what we're doing with art, but we wanted the programs that we do to have integrity. So we wanted advice from people within the community to support and make sure that we were on the right track, that we weren't kind of blatantly going, kind of almost going in the face of what we were trying to do. Although unintentionally, I think we did that with this program. So it had a lead-in exhibition with Matthew Buckingham and Peter Hujar, which were collected. Hujar was a photographer, contemporary and precursor of Mapplethorpe. His photographs are stunning, and we have some in our collection now, which is just really exciting for us to be able to show this. And this is his partner, David Wonarovich. And Matthew Buckingham did this piece about Charlotte Wolfe, who was exiled from Germany just before the war. And a really interesting kind of piece of work that can captivate you. This is images from the exhibition. So we've gone from 2 solo shows back to a group show, because the curator, Sean McGlashan, felt that you couldn't necessarily kind of cover LGBTI issues in one artist. So he kind of got a range of artists, and this is Ings Krumanga, who is intersex and explores this through all of his work. You're looking at, in the image in the foreground is Patty Cronin, who is an American artist, and this is a memorial to a marriage, because at the time of making this work, she and her partner Deborah Cass's work is the piece in the background, the Warhol-esque piece of her in the background, and they wanted to be buried together, and they wanted their relationship to be valued and recognized by the state of New York in a way that they couldn't do legally. So she made this, she learned how to sculpt with clay, and she made this very, very classical sculpture of her and Deborah lying down in an embrace that was recast in marble and was put over the grave plot that they bought together. And this was the bronze maquette for that. We then bought this for our collection, which has been hugely given the outcry that followed, which I'm skipping a story, but it's really exciting to have this piece in our collection as a legacy coming out of the programs that we've done. It's now shown in our major museum, Kelvingrove, in amongst all the classical sculptures. So it's the idea of just pulling people in with a classical sculpture and starting to question their beliefs and their values and what they expect. And actually, we expected this to have a lot of controversy when it went into Kelvingrove. There's been nothing. If it was 2 men, maybe something different. But with 2 women, it's the Kelvingrove staff have reported back people sit and contemplate it, maybe and realize that it's about two women, but they still embrace it as well. So this had kind of Hockney, it had Pierre Gilles, Deborah Cass, it had Felix Gonzalez Torres, Mapplethorpe. And we also worked with Amnesty International as well, who did this display at the back of the exhibition. And we had our response space, which again had leaflets and spaces for you to relax, read, relax, and respond, she says. But also to engage you in the issues and to start a kind of a discussion, a space for that to kind of happen. And there's the opinion board. And the outreach projects, this is a project that a local artist who we've worked with quite a bit, David Sherry, worked with the Scottish Transgender Alliance, which is a unique organisation in Europe in that it's a government-funded organisation on transgender cultures. And this is more work from that exhibition there. We also had 2 residencies looking at LGBTI and disability, which questioned a lot within the building, and how the building operated, and how we worked, and how we supported disability, which we're still unpicking right now. We also, minority ethnic, so we had the fantastic photographer Jamu X, who you can see here, with the curator Sean McGlashan in the background looking shyly at his feet, as he is wont to do. But what I want to do is focus, because as I said, Elbow Room in 2004 completely changed the way that we worked in a really positive way. The kind of sense of solidarity of all coming together around this issue, around the work, this positivity, really shifted the mindset of senior managers in terms of what we were doing, so they embraced the work that we were doing. Made in God's Image did the opposite. It fractured the institution, it fractured the company. Made in God's Image was a project we set up with Anthony Schrag, who had worked with us in Elbow Room. He worked with the Metropolitan Community Church and other faith groups. And they did this project where they kind of very process-based, exploring. There was no idea of what was coming out. And at this point, I went on maternity leave. This is not my get-out clause. This is, I'm having to relay from what I know from colleagues and things about this. The exhibition opened. It was opened up by the head of museums at the time. It had works from faith. So this is a young Islamic artist in Scotland who was exploring his faith and how that reconciled with his sexuality. It had this piece, and it had this piece, which you see in a latter stage of its life. And Jane Clark had invited people to write into the simple act of writing into the Bible if you felt excluded. She'd done it as a student. She made annotations and notes about the text in the Bible and how that related to her life. The Daily Mail, and a tabloid newspaper, got hold of it. They basically said that we'd invited people to blaspheme, that we were going against this. They wrote to the Pope to condemn the artwork. It went viral. We had the church, we had the council come down on like a ton of bricks. The work was never removed, but Jane, the artist, kind of asked for it to be put in a perspex case, and people could leave their notes that would be put in there. Again, like all things that go into the media, Anthony was cited as the artist. He was never the artist. And he had reporters camped outside his house for 2 weeks harassing him about this work, even though he was never the artist involved in it. And it kind of developed as this incredibly powerful piece of work. Because as Anthony said, when it was first suggested, he thought, oh, it's okay, you can do it. He didn't think it would be that great a work. As when the media sat camped outside his house for 2 weeks, he thought, I want so little to do with this artwork, it's not true. But when he saw the final piece of work with all the notes, with everything that the discussions that were happening between people from the church who were coming in and saying, it's so amazing that the Bible is in a public space and you're talking about issues which are affecting so many people in this country, openly, and it became this incredibly powerful piece of artwork that has started to travel since we kind of came out of it. But the upshot was that the senior management started to rethink the rest of the program. They started to shut down areas of the program, which then caused a revolt by some of the artists in the city that they felt they were being censored, and some of the work was being censored. So, but in this, Goma was almost silenced because we weren't allowed to talk to anybody. It was the senior managers took responsibility of it, but then they became unable to do it because what they wanted to do was shut it down and stop the complaints. So it's that interesting thing around the duty of care for the people that we work with. We then felt like we were alienating all the people we work with, but the staff in Goma felt that they were alienated by the senior staff because they were unable to say how things were how they'd really felt, and that kind of the duty of care within the organisation, but also externally in the organisation, and how we look after everybody involved in the whole process. So they put together this exhibition, which kind of charted the history of the social justice programs to kind of explain ourselves in some way, and also put in the negative and the positive comments that we'd received, and started to get a conversation about what had really happened to counteract the media or to kind of inform people other than the media sound bites that we'd kind of had. So this was it. Okay. So skipping to the end, you'll be relieved to hear. And, you know, in some ways, this program ignited the most discussion that we've had. We are no longer doing social justice programs, partly due to this, that the idea was shut down by senior management. I came back from maternity leave in early 2010 to be told that we weren't allowed to talk about social justice. That was a bad word within our service. We weren't going to be doing these social justice programs anymore, partly recession, but also partly just because the organization became scared about what the reaction might be, and that idea of risk, and how you manage risk, and how you control. And that's just really, really interesting, and how it just fractured all those relationships. And I think Victoria Hollows, the museum director, was also on maternity leave, and it was interesting that both of us came back having not experienced the worst of the crisis within the gallery, and just looked at it and saw the richness of what had happened and how we could take this forward in terms of really exploring what we meant by human rights. And one of the participants that we'd worked with, James Morton, kind of said, well, if you're going to have the rhetoric of saying that you're working with human rights, you have to expect to be martyred at some point. Mm-hmm. And that sad thing is, one of the questions I would like to pose to you about how you think and you're exploring issues is around the idea of the rhetoric of the institution versus what you actually mean by that, and what you actually do and your principles, and when the discomfort happens. So I will leave you as that thought.
Thank you very much. Agora vamos passar para as perguntas, mas eu antes ia só fazer um ponto de situação, que eu acho que estas duas falas foram muito significativas deste dia. Enquanto práticas públicas, eu vou só pontuar um pouco as duas conversas para me sugerir também para vocês relembrar um pouco aquilo que foi dito. Dentro desta ideia também de que é necessário imaginar novas práticas, é necessário imaginá-las para essa responsabilidade pública. Foi falado aqui, falou-se nesta cultura do comum, não é, que é necessário o uso dos recursos nas instituições que devem ser colocados à responsabilidade de todos, a ideia de espaço público, a ideia de que é preciso resistir também ao facto do museu ser o único lugar da experiência. Existe um espaço expandido em que o museu pode atuar e que será necessário também pensar esse espaço expandido de modo a desvincular o lugar tradicional do museu como criação da experiência estética, política, social, etc. Também retive um aspecto interessante, que muitas vezes nós temos a ideia de que quando o museu atua com uma programação direcionada a adolescentes, a crianças, a grupos em risco, minorias étnicas, minorias sexuais, a programação normalmente serve-se de artistas, ou artistas menos conhecidos, ou programação mais barata, ou programação de menores recursos. É interessantíssimo como a Katy nos trouxe exemplos aqui, tanto a Katy como a Sarah, de artistas de grande qualidade, desde Mapplethorpe, Anthony Gormley, Barbara Kruger, de como isso serve também para qualificar essa experiência. Então, às vezes nós temos essa ideia de que é necessário uma programação menos qualificada para esse tipo de públicos. Retive também essa necessidade de incluir parceiros. Quando incluímos parceiros na programação, sejam eles parceiros que vão para além da curadoria do museu, seja o parceiro educativo, seja o parceiro fora do museu, as escolas, as instituições, etc., o ambiente da experiência, ele torna-se mais elétrico, mais rico. Então, também penso que passou, tanto nas exposições e na programação que a Katy organiza, quanto na da Sarah, toda essa eletricidade no ar que é interessante para conectar e fazer conectores de experiências um entre os outros. Vamos agora passar para as perguntas que tiverem daí e que ambas estão abertas a essas respostas.
Oi, minha pergunta vai para a Sara, sobre a questão mais especificamente da ética no Centro de Arte, a questão da boa participação que você colocou. Como isso foi estudado, pesquisado, até você colocou que os próprios participantes colocaram também cartazes com regras possíveis também. O que seria uma participação ruim ou uma não boa participação? Se vocês tiveram algum problema... Alô? Se vocês tiveram algum problema com participação e tiveram que escrever uma ética para isso. Obrigada.
That's a good question. I think that the slides that I showed are some of the findings of our work and ways of talking about what happened. And there wasn't a kind of formal research, it was empirical research. So it was based on not only our experience, but talking with participants in the project. And when, I'm not sure, probably good participation is problematic because it does set up what bad participation is. And so I'm not quite sure I would know what bad participation is. I'm not even quite sure I like the word participation. Participation in the States is also a problematic term. So let's see, how am I going to get out of this? I know. So what I will say is that when we started the project, and I write about this, we actually wrote a book about open field, where we interviewed all of the artists who participated and have a series of essays about the project. And one of the things we talked about is writing the rules of the commons and the rules of open field. And there was a lot of debate about how we would stop things from happening that we didn't feel like we wanted to happen. And different people were afraid that different things would happen. Our head of operations was afraid that neo-Nazis would come and take over the field. Our curators, and perhaps we were afraid that people would show bad art. I was afraid that like mimes would come, or jugglers, or things like that. Other people were afraid that people would set up camp and stay overnight. I was afraid that people might get hurt, physically hurt, that people would try to do things they weren't equipped to do and be physically hurt. So in writing the rules, actually, we spent a long time writing those and worked through a lot of anxiety and realized that at the end of the day, the best we could do was this idea of protecting, just as we call it, like protect the space, protect the spirit, protect the people, and that everybody had to overcome internally some of their own fear in order to do the project. So that if people showed up with stuff that you didn't like and you didn't think was very good, that was great. If people came up with political views that you didn't like, that was going to be okay too. And so we worked through a lot of those issues in the course of writing the rules. At the end of the day, really none of that happened. And I'm not sure if that's a sign of success or a sign of failure. I'm not sure I answered your question, but that was like the best I could do.
Olá, queria parabenizá-las pela fala, né? Assim, não é uma pergunta, é uma questão que assim, eu tenho sentido. Primeiro, eu consigo observar dois movimentos dessa questão do público. Um é com relação ao projeto, né, do campo aberto, né, que é uma visão para a instituição, né, de fora para dentro. E um outro movimento, talvez da Escócia, que seria de dentro para fora. Assim, um aspecto assim que eu consigo perceber é que a gente, assim, diferentemente dos países da onde vocês vêm, a gente está num país muito mais novo, né? E parece que essa questão do público é uma questão assim muito imatura, no sentido de que a gente não tem uma percepção do que seja esse commons. Essa tradução, assim, eu fico meio na dúvida, né? Seria o comum. Mas aqui em português a gente não usa essa expressão comum. Seria o bem comum.
Seria o espaço público?
O espaço público, né? Mas a gente não tem essa apropriação desse espaço público, né? Assim, como exemplo, assim, a gente pega o entorno aqui do museu, né? Há uma não ocupação desse espaço público. Eu tive há 3 semanas atrás perto do Museu de Salvador, uma cidade muito importante aqui no Brasil, e há eu passei minha infância em Salvador, já faz muitos anos, e há uma deterioração desse espaço público, né? E aí as pessoas, os moradores falam, você não pode mais andar ali, você não pode mais andar aqui, quer dizer, os espaços públicos vão sendo... Você não tem o direito de ir e vir no espaço público.
I mean, I guess the idea of the confronting of public space, we would see our museum as a public space. It kind of is a meeting place. It has a library, it has a cafe, it has a free toilet in the centre of town. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering the question quite right. So it has that contested ground of the public space, and it's that idea of the control over that is essentially ours. But it's allowing as much into kind of unplanned social meetings and social interactions and interventions with that public space that can possibly happen. And I guess that's where the program that we're kind of looking at is kind of how it's developing. But also it's that idea of different voices coming in, so that people coming in expecting a modern art gallery, because we're called the Gallery of Modern Art, so they come in as a public, free Gallery of Modern Art, expecting a very specific thing, and then there's exhibitions in there from local people talking about issues, or using issues very pertinent to them in a very visual way, so challenging preconceived notions in that public space. So I think I've taken what you were saying completely elsewhere, but yeah, I guess that's one way of kind of trying to find a solution for a different public space from within the institution, because I am quite institutionalized. I've been working there for 10 years, so I think institutionally, but I think how I can push the boundaries of that institution and how I can bring different voices into that institution and manipulate the space that I have an opportunity to program.
And I would also say that I couldn't do what I did on Open Field inside the museum. I could not have done that. That's why I did it outside. And I think that and now there's talk in the museum about how Open Field can come inside the museum, what things can we adapt, what can we bring in. But I have questions about that. I have questions about how much, I mean, the question I was going to pose to us is to think about how much, both institutionally and personally, we're willing to share, and how much we are willing to change and be changed. And Open Field changed me. The cat video contest changed me. I mean, it really did. I now have a very different understanding of what I imagine a cultural institution or an art center or a museum of the future to be. That it should be a place that can have both a Kara Walker exhibition and a cat video contest, because both of those things are forms of culture that are being produced. And if we're going to be contemporary, how can we embrace and acknowledge those things? So there's a way in which all of the work that I had done in the 90s and the work that Walker had done was so much about social inclusion, but we had left out aesthetic inclusion, because that's very hard for us. There was no home for them at the Walker Art Center. They weren't making work that was going to be shown in the Walker Art Center. It was not necessarily a place for them, and suddenly it was a place for them. And so, again, I don't know where I was going with that, but I think in that sense of creating public spaces, I think it's also understanding all the different ways in which people are not included, and then understanding that and finding ways to open that up, because it's not always what we assume. And we didn't set out to bring the plein air painters in. I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't even know those people felt discluded. That only came out after the fact.
I mean, I guess I'm working with an associate artist at the minute, Rachel Mimietz, and we've been working around play and non-designated play areas. And we had a little conversation before about Atelier Public, which is, in some ways, it's almost like open field within the institution. And came out of idea of Palle Nielsen and the model from Moderna Museet in 1968. And basically, we left an empty gallery and materials, and the public created the artwork. And my biggest fear was that we would get the plein air painter leaving their artwork in our custodial, but actually it didn't happen. People embraced it. But it's really interesting about how we as institutions, we as artists, make spaces, and making those spaces that people feel that they can come into and shape those spaces. And I think that's a really important thing to think about, the spaces that we make as institutions and artists.
Queria acrescentar só aqui uma reflexão. É interessante a questão que o Mauro levanta, tentando aproximar o contexto brasileiro, principalmente do Rio de Janeiro, com os dois exemplos que trazem, a Cat e a Sarah. Atualmente nós estamos... muitos museus na cidade do Rio de Janeiro estão surgindo, alguns deles com um plano muito bem traçado, outros nós ainda não tivemos conhecimento daquilo que possam vir a ser. Nesta mesa em que estamos a falar de reconfigurações dos museus, é interessante pensar como nós podemos, enquanto sociedade, pensar esses novos museus que estão surgindo. Que lugar é esse do museu para hoje? Será esse museu que vai incluir todas essas diferenças? Será um museu blockbuster? Será um museu que quer outro tipo de situações? Museu de grandes exposições? Portanto, qual será esse modelo que irá surgir? Penso que é importante nós ficarmos alerta e termos estes exemplos que nos servirão também um pouco de guia para toda essa inclusão, exclusão, participação, não participação, nessa construção do comum, não é? Então queria só deixar essa reflexão. Mais alguma questão? Temos aqui na frente um, lá atrás outro, ali outro, de repente acenderam-se.
Primeiramente, obrigado pelas falas, muito boas. Eu acho que todas caminham no sentido importante e urgente, que é essa criação desse espaço público, pensar o museu nesse sentido. A minha pergunta vai para as duas, para a Kate e para a Sarah, e acho que é uma questão que não ficou muito clara para mim, mas que vocês já falaram, que é: como é que vocês identificam os grupos que estão, que precisam ser incluídos? Como é que vocês identificam esses que não estão frequentando o museu e que, por meio dessas atividades, estão sendo buscados para interagir, participar?
I mean, like I said, a lot of the issues that the Gallery of Modern Art worked with on the social justice programs came out of an equalities commission, an equalities committee, which was part of the council working structure. So La Prefettura, am I right in saying? So it was a decision taken outside the gallery. We were given the issues. But what we did was we worked with local voluntary groups, local charities, national organizations, to kind of look at the issues that we were exploring in each program, and then they would suggest some of the groups that we would work with. So, for example, Base 75, the women involved in prostitution, was suggested to us. They weren't coming into the institution, but we had their manager on the advisory board who was really keen that the women who used her service had an access to this to explore how they were perceived and how gender-based violence really affected their lives. And for things like, we had a similar structure, so we had an advisory board who would suggest groups for us. And it was identified, some of the audiences were kind of outside of the city and had been to some of the other museum venues, like Kelvin Grove and the Riverside Museum is a museum of transport, but contemporary art was this big no-go area because wasn't for them. So again, it's that thing about going out to the spaces where they felt safe with the artists and creating a kind of what I would call a therapeutic model and a process-based model. So it's working with the skills in the room. So the skills that they're bringing into that space and their interests and shaping the project with that, and eventually introducing the idea of this big institution. I suppose my work is different, I can't speak today, from the Learning and Access curator, who is more of an educator and a mediator. I didn't use Barbara Kruger's exhibition as a starting point. I used the issue of violence against women, and I used artist practice, and that's that therapeutic model. I wasn't asking them to respond to Barbara Kruger's exhibition. I was asking them to look at the issue from their own perspectives, from the artists that they were working with, and I always created an extra budget that if the artist didn't have the skills or felt that they needed to bring in other people, like a writer or a musician, there was a budget for them to be able to do that in the project that didn't have to be said from day one. So it was very much explorative, which sometimes was hard for some of the groups we worked with to get their heads around initially, because they wanted a plan of 10 weeks or 16 weeks. What are we going to do each week? But it was like saying, well, no, we can't, because then you're not allowing the people in this project to be able to explore what they would like to explore. So we left it open. And I think by the end of the project, it was hard and it was challenging. And I guess it's that, going back to the making the spaces, I see my role as making that space for that to happen. And when they come back to me and go, we need this to happen, I have to make that space happen in the gallery. And so it's constantly shifting and moving, and my role is to be able to negotiate all of that for people who are wanting to show in the gallery.
There are a lot of people who don't come to the Walker Arts Center. I think that the way there's definitely a change in the approach we had in the 90s and the approach we have with something like Open Field. And I think that that's a kind of maturity may not be the right word, but based on a lot of experience. And I think that that's also true of a lot of museums in the United States. There was a lot of money in the 90s for museums to be more socially inclusive. And I think what happened is that you realize there are a lot of reasons why people don't come to your museum, and it's not the fact that they might be a person of color, that they might not have money, that they might not be old enough, they might not have the education. There are a whole host of reasons. It may be because you don't have a very welcoming environment, or they can't park, or they're just not interested in contemporary art, or you're approaching, I mean, much to Katie's point, you're saying, come see Barbara Kruger. We want you to see this show of Barbara Kruger. Barbara Kruger is a very important artist. Come see our very important artist because this is very important. As opposed to saying, we have something that we think you'll find interesting because we understand what your interests are. And I think that is the shift between the 90s and something like Open Field. Open Field says, this isn't about us, the museum. This is actually about you. We want to know who you are, what you're interested in, what you're about. It's like dating someone. You don't want to date someone who always talks about themselves. You want to date someone who says, tell me about you. I want to know about you. And I think it is very much like, it's like any other relationship you have. And so I think it's actually been a very subtle but very kind of important shift. And even at the end of our family day, I ask people at the visitor service desk to say, thanks for coming. Thank you. Thanks for coming, because your presence actually makes the museum possible. If people didn't come to the museum, we wouldn't need a museum. We could have all the artists in the world, all the objects in the world, but if there wasn't anybody in the museum, there'd be nothing going on.
Eu posso falar em português, mas você faz algum tipo de pesquisa de marketing ou algum tipo de pesquisa teórica para descobrir que grupos são esses e o que vai fazer eles irem ao museu?
Sarah?
We did, and I think we've done, I think Open Field was set up as a very different proposition, right? That was, we're going to set up a space, and anybody who wants to come can come. So part of Open Field was a little different in that people self-identified, and we worked with them to make that happen. But I think earlier when we had done things, for example, we had done a lot of work with low-income families, and we had done a lot of research working with a lot of partner organizations to understand what the barriers were to inviting people into the museum. When we did our teen program, actually the teen program is probably the best example because it's the most successful and the most enduring. We actually did a lot of studies with the teens coming into the institution to ask them what made them uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable about being in the museum. And one of the things we learned is that teens felt like the guards were always watching them. And so we actually had training for the guards in how to sort of address teen populations, and in fact, the guards were watching them more. And so we went through a lot of wholesale training in the institution to learn how to work with different populations. One of the things we do now when we work with partner organizations, particularly family organizations, is we bring before anyone comes for a program, we bring them over, we host them, we invite them into the institution, and we introduce them to people at the visitor service desk. So when they come on their own for Free for Saturday, because part of inclusion is participating in what culture, what society participates in. You don't want your own program just for you. You want to be part of what everybody else is doing. That's one of the things we learned with the teens. They want to do programs when everybody else is there. They don't want like their own little teen ghetto. And when we worked with low-income families, we wanted them to come to Free Day along with everybody else. We didn't want them to have their own special, like, poor family day. But one of the things we did is because we knew they were uncomfortable and didn't understand the rules of the museum, we brought them in, familiarized them with what the codes of behavior were with the museum. What you do when you walk in, what the visitor desk is, did you pay, did you not pay? And when they came on their own, they could say, "Hi, John, good to see you." They knew somebody. And that knowing somebody made all the difference in their ability to actually come and see it as a place that was for them. So things like that.
Estamos já um pouco fora do tempo, vamos fazer mais... Tem aqui um na frente, não? Tem lá atrás ainda uma pergunta. E o Guilherme também quer fazer.
As falas foram muito interessantes e eu, enquanto educadora da rede pública desse município, eu fico muito incomodada porque esse município ele não oferece um espaço como a Sara e a outra palestrante coloca, que disponibiliza para diversos grupos da sociedade um acesso democrático a um espaço fantástico de cultura. E eu hoje eu trabalho na rede pública do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, do município também, onde nenhuma dessas duas instituições elas viabilizam para os estudantes que são os principais consumidores dessa cultura, né, que vão formar esse público. Hoje eles não fazem isso. E a gente, quando quer, a gente mete o peito, mete a cara e vai fazer. Né? Hoje eu dou aula para uma escola em Paquetá. Eu não sei se a maioria aqui conhece a realidade de Paquetá. É 1 hora para ir e 1 hora para voltar, quando tem a barca, porque não é 1 hora toda hora. É 1 hora, 7 horas da manhã, 1 hora às 10, e isso em horários diferentes, Praça 15, Paquetá, Praça 15. E é mega difícil trazer as crianças para cá. É muito difícil. E eu quero trazê-los para cá. Quero trazê-los para vários espaços que eu sei que eles amam, porque eles são muito esfomeadinhos. E como é que tanto nos Estados Unidos quanto na Inglaterra, né, na Escócia, se mata a fome dessas comunidades, né, porque problemas desse tipo há também lá. Né, tanto que a Sara trabalha com as diversidades e exclusões, e a gente vê que o trabalho é maravilhoso, e eles vêm, eles fazem, eles produzem maravilhosamente bem.
Obrigada pelo teu comentário. Alguma de vocês quer comentar alguma coisa? Vamos passar para a próxima. You want?
I'm not sure I got the full translation, but what I would say is that, when you give a presentation, you're showing the best of. Again, we're on a date, right? I've worked at the Walker 20 years, and, open field comes, 17 years into that work that I did. And I promise you, there were a lot of bumps and a lot of failures and a lot of moments where I thought I did not have the strength to do it. I stood in community meetings where people would stand up and point a finger at me, right, and accuse me of being like a white colonialist. I will not even say the word, right? I mean, just there are moments where you thought I am like taking this. You're taking the brunt of people's anger sometimes, and it was really, really, it was really hard. And I suppose we learned a lot from that, and I'd like to say that we persevered on the other end and everything was okay, but I don't think that that's true. I think, much like Katie said, there are moments where I think the institution has backed away from some things because it just became too hard, and you weren't sure that you really had all the armature in place that you needed in order to really be successful. And so, the teen program is the one example of the thing we really were able to persevere with, and for lots of reasons, including the fact that they're teenagers, right? And there is a different even power relationship there. So what you're seeing are a lot of successes, but there were a lot of hard lessons. So what I say is keep persevering, right? Because you learn something, and you understand things more deeply, and you find ways of doing things. Like necessity and experience and wisdom will make things possible.
Thank you. Aqui na frente o Guilherme Vergara. Não tem mais, Guilherme, é a tua vez agora.
Eu só queria também dar um toque assim de conversas entre uma mesa e outra, que foi muito rica à tarde. Então, é nesse sentido, se a gente teve um início da tarde em que falava dos arquivos do passado como um pensamento forma, algo que não como nostalgia, mas como uma potência de futuro, eu vi nas duas apresentações algo que, para mim, é muito forte, porque é presente, e são situações que dizem respeito a algo que me atraiu e na busca e na procura da Cláudia Saldiva, desse momento de 1971, 72, 73, e que no ano passado nós tivemos aqui no seminário uma apresentação do Domingos da Criação aqui, 1971, que também veio num processo de 68, 69, 71, onde todo esse lugar aqui eram ocupados por experiências de participação direta. Passa-se um ciclo. Cláudia está num processo também de reativar, de buscar estratégias de tornar ativo esse lugar da solidariedade, essa experiência de, eu diria assim, a resistência da solidariedade. Mas também, em 1972, teve a Carta de Santiago do Chile, e que me pareceu, do que vocês estiveram apresentando, é algo que é uma ressonância do que foi dito e que foi escrito como patrimônio intangível ou ecomuseus. Mas um outro nome para ecomuseus era antimuseus. Então, na verdade, as práticas que a Sara vem apresentando tem esse jogo de ambiguidade entre museus e antimuseus. E o fato de o próprio museu estar provocando uma atividade antimuseu é de uma complexidade muito interessante para a gente estar atento. É quando você tem essa densidade de entender o contemporâneo como lugar das contradições simultâneas, um lugar do encontro dos opostos. A tarde de hoje, para quem acompanhou a tarde, foi nesse sentido muito rico para a gente, né, registrar esse encontro dessas reconfigurações. E eu estou falando isso porque a pergunta que é trazida pela primeira mesa, as perguntas pela primeira mesa, se tornam ativas como perguntas ainda, né, nas duas apresentações. Então, nesse sentido, eu só queria dar esse toque para a Marta também concluir, mas muito obrigado.
E eu quero agradecer a todos e relembrar que amanhã logo às 9 da manhã, vamos ter um grupo de estudos, entre as 11 e as 13, e pela tarde vamos ter a primeira mesa que se chama Novas Curatorias, Novas Pesquisas, e seguidamente iremos fechar com formas e contextos alternativos, práticas emergentes em educação e arte no Brasil. 11 da manhã, desculpem, começa amanhã às 11 da manhã o grupo de estudos. Obrigada e boa tarde. Thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah.